I bought my first house in November 2019. As a kid who grew up dirt poor, obviously this was a huge accomplishment for myself and my family. We moved in, and for the first few months, it was our quiet little suburban house with a decent yard, and it was our slice of the American dream. At the start of the pandemic, I was furloughed from my job, so I was home for about a month. That's when my first experiences with sleep paralysis began. My girlfriend would typically be up an hour before me to take our daughter to daycare. I'd wake up, kiss them goodbye, and lay back down until my alarm went off. When I woke up one morning, I couldn't move. I almost could wiggle my fingers a little and move my eyes, but that was it. That's when I saw a little girl standing at the bottom of my bed out of the corner of my eyes. It looked like my daughter, even stood like she does, but the voice it had was warped and deeper somehow. It kept saying, "Dada," over and over again. Each time, the voice got deeper and almost seemed desperate for acknowledgement. I managed to break free of the paralysis and quickly sat up. She was gone. I kept telling myself it was just a dream, but the logical part of my brain knew better. Nothing else like that happened again until about a year later. Around Christmas of 2020, we always get a live tree instead of a fake tree at my girlfriend's insistence. It's a long-standing tradition in her family, and I'm vastly outnumbered if I chose to argue against it. I hate vacuuming up those needles. I digress. The night after, we set up and decorated the tree. I got up to grab some water from the fridge. My kitchen is separated from my living room with a wall about 4 feet high, with a support pillar on the right side. I open the fridge, grab a bottle of water, and close the door. As I turned to face the living room, that was when I saw her, a slumped-over figure of an older woman who was swaying back and forth. The swaying movements were rigid and almost mechanical. It looked like my mother, who had been passed away for over a year at this point. Who or what was this thing, and why was it here all of a sudden? Despite me telling myself to run down the hallway and lock my bedroom door, part of me had to know if this was real. I've had vivid dreams after one too many edibles, but this wasn't like that. As I rounded the corner pillar, I came around the corner and the figure was gone. Nothing. I stood in my living room, looking around and trying to get my breathing under control. Cold terror had engulfed me at that point, and I almost ran into my bedroom with a distinct certainty that I'd look back and find this thing running after me. The next morning, I told my girlfriend about it, and she immediately blamed the edibles. I thought she may be right, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't. She had never experienced anything, and is a staunch denier of the paranormal, so I knew trying to convince her this was real was a battle I had already lost. A few days later, my girlfriend had already left for work, but I was watching my daughter for the day. She normally gets up around 7:30, so I got myself up to shower at 6:45. As I'm drying off, I catch a figure walking down my hallway towards my daughter's room out of the corner of my eye. At first, I thought it was my girlfriend and shrugged it off, but then I realized that she'd been gone for almost an hour at that point. She kissed me goodbye like she always does before leaving. Panic gripped me like it never had before, and I ran to my daughter's room. I stopped at the door and heard her saying, "Hi, Mummy." I opened the door and flipped on her light to find my daughter still wrapped in her blanket, sitting up. "Good morning, baby," I said with a thin smile. "Good morning, Daddy. Where did Mummy go? What's wrong with her eyes?" Terrified, but still trying to keep my composure, I said, "Well, Mummy went to work before we woke up. She kissed me and you goodbye and she left. Why do you think something was wrong with her eyes?" My 3-year-old scrunches her face, and what she said next still freezes my blood when I think about it. Shaking her head, she says, No, Daddy. Mummy was just here, but her eyes were gone." I said nothing, and as calmly as I could, I got her out of bed and to the other side of the house. What the hell is this thing? And why is it just showing up now? I called my girlfriend at work a few hours later and talked to her about what had just happened. I put my little girl on the phone so she could tell her mother that I wasn't lying, and asked her if her eyes were okay. Mostly silent and very apprehensive, she agreed that I should call a priest if it made me feel better. The next morning, I called my local Catholic church and asked if the parish priest could come and bless my home. I'm baptized Catholic, and I'm very lapsed in practice, but I told the rectory secretary what was going on, and she immediately put me in touch with a priest outside of that particular parish who is known to deal with disturbances like mine, or worse. When he arrived, we talked more in depth about the things that had happened and how they started. Without any prompting, he walked to my daughter's room and threw holy water into the corner where her bed is. The priest told me that whatever this entity was, the way it was presenting itself was not only predatory, but likely demonic in nature. He added that doppelganger-type phenomenon is not always, but sometimes used by a demonic spirit to attempt to possess someone by withering down their ability to discern reality. I nodded in silent terror and didn't want to tell him that I felt like I could crap out my heart and die at that point. Since then, I haven't felt anything or seen anything out of the ordinary, and the house just feels more vibrant and lively. I still feel like I'm being watched sometimes, but chalk that up to paranoia to keep my sanity. My husband, our children and I have lived in the same home for almost 4 years now. The home was originally built in 1906. At the time this story takes place, we were remodeling our kitchen and bathroom. About 2 years ago, my little brother came to visit for a couple of weeks around Christmas. He was sleeping in the living room, which is probably 50 feet away from our bedroom. The second night he was there, around 3:30 in the morning, I wake up to him shaking me and standing on my side of the bed with a Mountain Dew and a bottle of water. He scared the holy hell out of me, freaked out as I asked him what the actual hell he was doing. He said, "What do you mean? You asked me to bring these to you." Confused, I said, "Wait, what?" "No, I didn't." He said, "Yes, you did. You yelled across the house for me to bring these to you." I was a little confused, but thought maybe I was yelling in my sleep, and so I dropped it. The next day, I yelled out to him from my room while folding laundry. I yelled for him multiple times, and he never came in there. So I went to him in the living room and was like, "Really, dude? I've been calling you for 5 minutes," and he said he couldn't hear me, which really made me question the night before. A couple of nights later, around the same time, I wake up to screaming. I jump out of bed and start running towards the screaming. As I get out of our room into the hallway, my little brother is standing outside my door, crying and hyperventilating. I start panicking like, "What's going on?" And he tells me that he woke up to get something to drink, walked back to the living room, and when he laid back down on the couch, I was standing at the foot of the couch, staring at him. He said, "Dude, what are you doing?" And the figure that looked like me didn't answer, so he said my name 3 more times and asked what I was doing again, and it didn't answer, but instead threw her head forward and looked at him, and then turned to the right and ran into the den. He said the figure was wearing the same clothes I was wearing, but her face was horrible and distorted. He was terrified and told me he didn't want to stay in our house anymore, so he went to my mum's and stayed there the rest of the time he was here. Now, nothing has ever happened to me in my house. My kids said some things have happened to them, but I chalked that up to kids being kids, until the other night. I was home alone and decided to take a bath. I get out of the bath and get dressed, and as I go to grab the doorknob to leave, I look back in the mirror, and on the left side of my face was a woman's face, completely tore up, like cuts everywhere. She had grey hair and was wearing a robe with a nightgown underneath. I was so shocked I couldn't move. I went to turn to run out of the bathroom, but nothing. I couldn't move, and all of a sudden in my left ear, I hear a whisper in a woman's voice say, "You're the only one that understands." I finally could move and ran out of the bathroom straight outside and called my husband. I'm still kind of freaked out by it, and if I have to go to the bathroom, I leave the door open. Nothing has happened since, and I'm really hoping nothing else does happen, because that was scary. I have noticed it's any time we're remodeling or changing anything in the house that some paranormal things start happening. The day before this happened to me in the bathroom, we finished putting new hardwood in the hallway. So this happened to me when I was around 10 years old. This little story haunts me to this day, and I can still see it all happening in my head. First, I have to clear things up. In my country, we celebrate Christmas on the 24th. We get our presents in the evening, and this happened on the same day, but in the morning. We live in a small house. It's not old or anything. My parents actually built it back in 1998. It's a 2-story house, and that Christmas, we had the tree in the upper room, my brother's room. My father locked the room for obvious reasons, so no one could come into the room before Christmas Eve, no one but my parents. That morning I was so excited for the presents, so I woke up early, and the room was obviously still locked. Both my parents and my brother were asleep. I rushed over to wake them, but I didn't because I wanted to check if there were any presents under the tree already. To be clear, I saw them both still asleep that morning. Instead, I sneaked back to the room where the Christmas tree was and looked through the keyhole. I expected to see a lot of presents lying under the tree, but instead, I saw a big shadow, like something big was lying in front of the tree. I stared at it for a while, when it suddenly begins to move. It was definitely not human. It looked like it jumped in the room, and even got onto the ceiling. You can actually see the tree, the window, and a little bit of the room. Then I saw it jump out of my vision, still in the room. A few seconds later, I saw an eye staring back at me through the keyhole. I was scared and jumped back, but didn't look again. My parents didn't believe me when I told them what happened. I still don't know what it could be, and I think I never will. I'm not sure about this part, but I thought I saw some wood in a square shape around the eye. I don't remember any color of the eye itself, but that's more because I'm a little colorblind. For reference, the thing I saw looked like what the channel Ghosts of Carmel, Maine captured. Nuke's Top 5 should have a good clip of it. This was my first and last encounter with paranormal stuff. When I was 13 months old, I lost my father to some suspicious circumstances, so I unfortunately never got the luxury of having a strong relationship with him. However, I remember vividly his face, his laugh, and many memories of us playing together. Even stranger was that my memories are from the house my mother and I moved into. After he passed in our old one, I remember playing games, tea party, and even dressing up with him. But the oddest part was that the photos my mum took of me when I was playing with him, there would always be an orb next to me. Same color, shape, and size. My mum always thought it was the camera, but it was never in the same spot. Fast forward to when I was about 6 years old. I remember it was Christmas Eve, so I was excitedly waiting for Santa Claus to come. I just remember what felt like someone kissing me goodnight, and when I sat up excitedly to see whom I hoped was Santa, instead, I saw this extremely bright light coming from the hall. Now, my mother was laying in bed next to me, fast asleep, and we had nobody else in the house, but I just remember watching it in awe, as it was a beautiful blue flash of light that seemed to open and then close. I remember writing it off as Santa leaving, so I excitedly woke my mother up to go open my presents. It was about 3 a.m. Now, obviously, as I got older and learned that Santa wasn't real, I questioned what I saw that night. It wasn't a car light, an electrical malfunction, or a TV that was accidentally turned on. And after mentioning it to my mother as an adult, I truly believe I watched him cross over. My reasoning? My mother told me in high school that she believed my dad's spirit was with me in the house. She said it was okay at first, but that she thinks he was playing tricks on her, like he did when he was alive. And hearing me talk to him all the time and seeing the orbs in all my photos began to freak her out. Well, it turned out that night, Christmas Eve, her best friend who had come for dinner had helped her cleanse the spirit away, and that after she did, I never mentioned my father or played with him again. My mother wrote off my seeing the bright light as my crazy childhood imagination, but as horrible as my memory is from my childhood, the feeling and image I got from that light that evening has always felt so real and raw to me. I still remember the feeling of peace and happiness that washed over me when I saw it. And now, 17 years later, I believe wholeheartedly I watched my dad cross over. This was earlier this year. I moved to a different town and was finally settled in my new place. It was the night before Christmas, and family was coming by early in the morning, so I spent the evening cleaning and prepping for the next day. All was well. I was in high spirits and crawled into bed. It was the first time I was hosting Christmas, so I was too anxious and giddy to sleep. I knew I should sleep soon, but I was wide awake, so I played on my phone a bit, just killing time. It was about 10 p.m. or so. Suddenly, I'm in the car with my husband on the highway, and he's pointing at something in the sky frantically, yelling, "What is that?" The next thing I know, I'm groggy and waking up, and there's lights all around me, and a dark shadow, and it feels like there are fingers pressing my temples, and something is on my head. I vividly remember that feeling of dread, and thinking, oh no, not again. And I feel groggy, but manage to mumble and lift my arm, which was heavy, and try to say I'm awake. I just closed my eyes and wanted it to be over with, and I remember thinking, I hope this doesn't last long. And suddenly, there's blackness, and I snap awake. I'm drenched in sweat, and there are 2 points on my forehead that are throbbing in pain. I'm in my bedroom again, with everything as I left it. TV on, phone in my hand, and I'm thinking it's been a weird dream. Suddenly, there's a loud noise, and the power shuts off, leaving me in the dark. It scared the hell out of me, and I jumped up and tried to wake my husband, who was dead asleep. Finally, after a few seconds, power was back on, and husband thinks I'm just silly. The thing is, I understand it could very much have been a dream. That's not impossible, but I'm not much of a dreamer, and if I do, they aren't vivid at all. This one felt so real. But why? And why aliens of all things? I'm mostly into ghostly stories, so don't read or look up UFO stuff that much. And I remember the physical feeling of dread that it was happening again. I could feel my stomach drop, and I felt sick when I thought, not this again. But I don't recall any other dreams or experiences like this. It's so random. It was Christmas, so I definitely wasn't thinking about aliens. So, just to give some context, I've had multiple random women, true strangers to me, say, "You're a beacon for souls," and "You're one of the oldest souls I've ever seen," or something to that effect, on the street or at a shop, passing each other. I was around 17 at the time, and we were going Christmas shopping the day this happened. I love Barnes & Noble, and would often spend all of my Christmas money there. We also lived in a small town that required us to drive about 2 or so hours each way just to get to the mall and Barnes & Noble. The night before leaving, I had one of the most realistic and vivid dreams of my life. The ones where, even after waking, you feel those feelings and emotions linger for the entire day, or maybe even week. I had met this man, and we fell in love, and the dream lived out the first few years of our life together, through our marriage, and just enjoying each other in a lot of detail. Flash forward to waking up, feeling the longing for the man I'd just spent years of my life with, and then going Christmas shopping with the family. While leaving Barnes & Noble, I locked eyes with the man. He was the man from my dream, and we continued to lock eyes, as if we were both happily terrified to see each other. The whole exchange lasted maybe 20 seconds, but our eyes never left each other, and we even took a few back glances as well at each other. It was like we had this shared experience of, "It's you." Meanwhile, before the dream, I've never seen this guy, and I lived 2 hours from the city we were in. I always wonder what was happening or why it happened. Perhaps us locking eyes was just him thinking I was staring, but his expression and demeanor was very different in that the feeling felt so shared. It was as if the world fell away as we looked at each other. I'm assuming my expression mirrored his, shocked with a small smile. Never saw him again or dreamt of him again after that. Maybe we just never got the hint the universe was throwing us. I'm happily engaged now to an amazing man, getting married in October. I'm content with the fleeting moment that it was. I feel no regret or sadness in not speaking to him, but the way we were passing each other, there wasn't actual time to talk. My family and I were leaving, and he and his were just arriving. This was at the door, and as I approached the door to leave and he was approaching the door to enter, if either of us had tried, it would have essentially held our entire families up. My fiancée and I, on a whim, saw a psychic in Sidonia this past winter. She was pointed and spot on with all the things she said. Nothing was general or vague, and was very surprising for a cold reading. But she said, "I'm a master healer, and she's only met a few in her life. I don't necessarily know what that means, other than what she told me." She also said the Earth and I have a reciprocal relationship, in that I give back as much as I take in energy from it, which resonated deep down in me for how much I love nature and the Earth, and have done since I was a young child. First off, I'm living very rural, in a small village with maybe 10 to 15 houses, but close to the highway. You can drive there within maybe 5 minutes, and also about 10 minutes away from the town. If you cross the street, it just takes you about a 10-minute walk to reach the forest. Christmas Day, in the afternoon, my partner and I decide to go for a little digestive walk, as we were really stuffed from all the food. It was about 5 p.m., and already dark when we left, and we had a big, bright LED flashlight with us. I also took my camera and my flash, as I love taking pictures of nature at night. We decided to walk on a little country road towards the forest, and then turn right, following a small gravel cycle track close to the forest border, which connects our village to the next, maybe 15 to 20 minutes walk between villages. In the middle part of the track, you have to walk down a small bit of forest. It's rather dark, and the trees are very high and quite dense. When we entered, I saw our flashlight reflecting on something and recognized a car being parked there on the side of the track, close to the trees. This struck me as odd, as cars are not allowed to drive there, and the path is very narrow and hidden, so I was a bit cautious. My partner pointed the light inside of the car, and it seemed to be empty. I also noticed the windows were frozen, so it must have been parked there for a while. A bit in front of the car, I spotted a tree with an intriguing structure, and I asked my partner to point the flashlight towards it so I could focus better and photograph it with my flash. After I took a few images, my partner told me, there's someone standing behind us in the middle of the road. He's looking at us. Nobody was following us the whole way. I kept looking around and behind us occasionally, because at this time in the evening, and close to the border of the forest, there are boars sometimes, and it's mating season, so they're more aggressive than usual. Indeed, there was a man standing behind us, staying out of the flashlight's reach. He wasn't saying anything, just standing there, facing us. At first, I thought he might be startled, as it may seem a bit weird if someone's just taking photos around your car. It was not even legal to drive on that path with a car. I decided to get up and confront him from a distance, explaining to him that I was just taking photos of that tree. He didn't react and just stood there. I then went on to ask him if he needed some light, and he replied that this wasn't necessary. It was odd, but I was still calm, sure about there being a normal explanation for his behavior. Nonetheless, my partner and I decided to just get the hell out of there and followed the path leading to the next village. It was maybe 5 to 7 minutes until we reached it. I remember the letters on his license plate, not the numbers though, unfortunately, and Googled it, and it turned out that he was from a city about 6 hours away from our village. Mind you, the country I live in is in a very strict lockdown right now, so you are only allowed to travel, even by car, if you have very urgent reasons. After we reached the first lantern of the next village, we looked back and observed the car driving a bit out of the forest, turning around and going back inside. I was able to see that he parked there again and turned the lights off. He didn't leave the forest. We then went home on a much longer way than initially intended, as I didn't want to go back there for obvious reasons. Our flashlight battery died on the way and my phone battery was low, so I didn't want to call the police back then, but I called them as soon as I arrived home and gave them all the details. Big regret that I didn't memorize the whole license plate, but it was just so surprising that I seriously didn't think about it. Also, it only occurred to me as really strange when I thought about the frozen windows and that he couldn't possibly have walked behind us. Plus, him having no light and not responding. He didn't seem to be sneaking up on us when I sat down to take the photo. I think I was very lucky to have my partner, the camera, and the bright light with me. I don't want to imagine what could have happened if I was alone. So, creepy guy sneaking around the forest. Let's not meet. Update. When I told my housemate, she theorized that he may have been spying on the houses very close to the forest border, as you can easily look into their backyards without being seen. You have to walk a bit up the hill and further, about 5 minutes. I think it's likely. I had the thought of photographing the car when I entered the forest part of the path, but somehow I felt unwell about it and decided not to do it, despite it being an interesting scene. In hindsight, I believe this saved me, as he must have hidden behind the trees close to the car and forest entrance. If he was really planning a burglary, or worse, dumping a body, I think it's not unlikely he may have attacked me if he realized I had a potential photo of his car with a recognizable license plate. We went back and found tape marking one of the trees, a very small hideout, more to store things than to sit in, as well as some cut-off part of a backpack. I was thinking maybe it was a drop-off location for drugs. The city close by really has a problem with that. Maybe he hid something. Didn't find anything yesterday, but I may go back more often in the future and watch out. In daylight, of course. So these stories are all from growing up in a house that is over a century old in a rural town in southern Virginia. The earliest one I can remember is from when I was about 7 or so. I'm 22 now. I had just gotten home from school and I was home alone. My mum had taken my brother to the doctor or something, and my dad was still at work. I guess it's important to try and describe the vague layout of the house. The fridge is in a utility room, which, unlike in most houses, was the equivalent of a sunroom. In order to get to the fridge, you have to either just come in the back door or walk through the kitchen from the living room/den. I went to the fridge to look for a snack and looked outside and saw 10 figures that were entirely grey and had no faces. I learned in high school that these are called shadow people or shadow beings, and it's good that they were outside and not in the house. I was terrified. I stayed away from the doors and windows until my parents and brother got home, and was so thankful that my bedroom was on the 2nd floor. The next story I remember is from when I was about 9. It was Christmas Eve, and my dad and I were decorating the tree in the family room, different from the living room. This is at the front of the house. My mum was in her room, wrapping the rest of the presents. My brother was at his dad's place. Now, it's important to say that my mum's bedroom was right above the family room, and above her room is the attic. We were almost done with the tree, and my dad had just picked me up so I could put on the topper, when he hesitated. I asked him if he heard a rocking chair. He said he did. I put the topper on, and he set me down. He decided to go up and see if my mum had brought down my great-grandma's rocking chair out of the attic. We knocked on her door so she could hide presents that weren't wrapped and came in. She didn't have the chair down, so we asked her if she heard the chair. She hadn't, so we decided to check the attic. The rocking chair had a stack of other stuff on top of it, but it was rocking. The next one was really scary at the time. I was about 12. Half of the attic was converted into a bedroom for me to have more space. My dad built it, and let me tell you, he was great at making furniture and boxes and the like. But houses? No. The floor was incredibly thin, and my mum could hear me walking all the time. I had stayed up late this night reading. I was in bed reading with the light on when the door to the attic opened. I heard footsteps coming towards my bed, and then the imprint of a knee on the foot of my bed. I panic and throw my blanket over my head and wait. Eventually, I can feel the pressure ease off my bed and hear the footsteps retreat. I then hear the attic door close. I pull the blanket down and get up to look at the door, and the slide lock is in place. On my way back to bed, my mum yells at me to stop walking around and go to sleep. The next morning, I ask her if she heard walking before she yelled at me, and she said no. When my stepbrother moved in when I was about 15, he took that bedroom, and he had a lot of experiences with the attic door opening when it was locked. It stopped for a bit when he put duct tape over the lock, but it started again after about a month. The attic was a really bad idea for a bedroom. The last one is short, and I don't remember it at all. This is mostly from my mum, so I'm not sure how accurate this is. I was about 14, and it was in the middle of summer, so I made a pallet on the floor to sleep. My bed was a loft bed, and the AC in that house doesn't really work well on the second floor. I had taken over my brother's old room at this point. I was sleeping on the floor, and my mum bursts into the room, yelling at me, asking me who I had in there with me. And me, groggy and just stunned awake, just asking what was going on and trying to tell her I was alone. She said she heard a very deep voice in my room with me, so she thought I had snuck someone into my room somehow. There was no one in there with me. December 23rd, 2008. The time was 7:36 Eastern. I was sitting on the floor of the den, finishing up wrapping Christmas gifts for my children. Their father was sitting in a recliner chair behind me, also wrapping. My cell phone rang. I glanced down and saw that it came up as an unknown number, so I didn't answer it. It immediately rang again, with the same unknown number, but this time I decided to answer. Hello? It was a male's voice. He asked for me by name. I said that it was indeed me. He then asked if I was sitting down. I remember at the time that this was such an odd question to ask, and I confirmed that I was indeed sitting down. He then proceeded to tell me that one of my best friends was killed in a car crash, and said, "She wanted you to know. I apologize for the news." And then the line disconnected. My heart dropped, and my face must have reflected it because my husband moved from his chair and asked if I was all right. I told him what the man said, and he hugged me. We finished wrapping and eventually went to bed to try to sleep. The next morning my phone rang again, and it was my best friend's mother. She was calling to tell me the news. When I said that I knew, she asked me how. So I explained the phone call, and she said that that was impossible and went silent for a few moments before explaining. My best friend moved from the East Coast to Alaska several months prior, and that is where she passed away from a car accident. She was killed instantly upon impact. The time of her accident was 3:36 p.m., the exact moment that my phone rang on the East Coast at 7:36. I thought maybe it was the EMS or first responder on the scene, but no, they were not allowed to make notifications until after her body was identified and confirmed, which took overnight, and her mother was the first person to be notified that morning. A glitch? A ghost? An angel? No one knows, but I will never forget that day, as it changed my life forever. So when I was 14, I started seeing and hearing weird things, reality pixelating, words appearing in my head like someone was talking to me, and a person appearing in my room and conversing with me. At the time, I kind of just thought I was going crazy. I was depressed and kind of welcomed a diversion from reality. I had no friends. At least an imaginary person was someone to talk to. I used to wake up hearing songs playing loudly, Like a Stone by Audioslave and Disorder by Joy Division are two examples. It was so loud and clear, I thought someone had turned my radio on, but I'd go over to check, and it was off and unplugged. So on Christmas Eve, this imaginary person I was perceiving tells me, "I'm leaving now, and you won't see me again." Then, a white door appears, standing in the middle of my room. It's slightly cracked and emitting a blue-purple light. The person goes on to say, "Through that door is home. You know what you have to do to get there. I'll be back in another 14 years. Then they walked through the door, shut it behind them, and it disappeared. Not only that, but all of the weird things I was seeing and hearing stopped too. No more voices or words or pixelating reality. It's been 14 years and nothing like that has happened since. Here's where the big twist came for me. Last year, my partner, never having heard about my vivid hallucinations, started telling me about weird stuff he used to see as a kid. He told me one time he hallucinated a grey, freestanding door that was slightly cracked open, and behind it was a blue-purple light. He said he felt like something was waiting for him behind that door. My heart almost stopped, because other than the door being slightly darker in colour than mine, it sounded like the same thing I'd seen. I have no idea what to make of this, but I feel like there's something deeper to the fact that we very well might have had visions of the same door. Has anyone else seen this thing? Before anyone asks, there is no history of schizophrenia or any kind of psychosis in either of our families, nor either of us were using substances of any kind at the time. Also, it's been 14 years later, and I still haven't seen that imaginary friend again. Still time to go before Christmas Eve, though. Several years ago, we bought a close friend of ours a wine bottle holder for Christmas. We picked it up at a Coles or something, about a month before Christmas Day. We spent a lot of time with her and her family over the years, so we had a pretty good idea of what she liked and what would match her style. Well, about 2 or 3 weeks before Christmas, we were hanging out at her place, and we saw the exact same wine bottle holder we had already wrapped displayed in her kitchen. She bought it a few days before we came over. Obviously, we didn't say anything to her, but knew we had to find a last-minute replacement gift for her as soon as we could. We enjoyed the rest of the evening and left pretty late, but as soon as we got in the car, we went on about how much it sucked that she bought the exact same wine bottle holder. We laughed it off, knowing that we at least were dead on when it came to her style. The next day, while we were brainstorming some new gift ideas, we decided to unwrap her gift and save it for next year in case we could give it to someone else. As we unwrap it, we were all shocked to see a very different wine bottle holder than the one we had picked out. Not even close. We were so confused because we knew for sure we had purchased the right one. I mean, we wrapped the damn thing. We went through every possible logical explanation, but it just wasn't adding up. Either we all went crazy, or something magically swapped that gift out while it was under our tree. We never told her because, obviously, it sounded crazy, but we did end up giving her that bottle holder that year because we figured that whoever swapped it wanted her to have it. She never used it. When I was about the age of 5, I received a life-size doll for Christmas. On the box, the doll was called the Wispy Walker doll. It was about the same height as me, with blonde hair and overalls. The strangest part about this gift was that no one could really recall who got me this doll, as it was labeled from Santa. Even years later, when I asked my family who got me the doll, no one could remember who. I instantly did not like the doll because it freaked me out. I left the doll in the back of my closet, far away from all my other toys. Years passed, and the doll remained in the back of my closet untouched. When I was about 7 years old, I began to play hide and seek with my mum in our home. I decided to hide behind the door in my bedroom, which is right in front of my closed closet door. I gasp when I come to find the walking Wispy doll is out of her box, placed behind my bedroom door with one eye open and one eye shut. I scream and run to my mum crying. I tell her, "Mum, Big Sis played a prank on me and put the walking doll behind my door to scare me." My mother, confused, explains that my sister had left for camp this morning with her class. My mum walks over to check behind the door, and there was no doll. Keep in mind, the closet door was closed when I went to hide behind the door originally. My stomach drops, and I'm at a loss for words. "Maybe you're just seeing things," my mum told me. We opened the closet to check if the doll is inside. It was, but outside of its box, just standing next to it. I had never taken the doll out of its original packaging. I eventually got rid of the doll. I threw it in the trash and found it back in my backyard. It freaked me and my sister out so much, we dismembered the doll's arms and legs so it couldn't walk anymore, and made sure to throw her out on trash day. Didn't see it after that ever again. Mum and Dad still think we're crazy to this day. But every time I remember this story, I get chills. I'm a female living in West Norway. I was about 15 or 16 when this happened. I think it was maybe around 3 years ago. I remember it was winter because it was really cold and snowy outside. I was left alone in me and my family's cabin while the others went Christmas shopping for food and last-minute packages for some friends or something. I don't really remember why they went out, but that's not so important. My point is, I was all alone in our cabin, playing some games on my phone while listening to some music on the radio in my room, which was on the first floor of the cabin. I remember that I suddenly got cold and went to get a blanket that was on our sofa. Just when I was about to get up and grab the blanket, I saw some kind of shadow in my sight vision. I didn't really care that much because I thought that maybe it was just my imagination playing a trick on me, because I didn't really like being alone in general, and especially not in a cabin on a mountain in the middle of the winter. I got the blanket and went back to my room to play some more games. About 1 hour passed, and I had forgotten all about the strange shadow, but then I saw it again. This time, it stayed in my sight vision for about 3 to 5 seconds before it went away again. I got a little creeped out about it since I was the only one in the cabin at the moment. Therefore, I decided to lock the door to my room. Right after I locked the door to my room, I heard some kind of crying upstairs on the second floor of the cabin. At first, I thought it was my little sister, who was about 3 years at the time. She used to cry a lot, and I asked out loud, "What's wrong? Did you hurt yourself?" I heard her answer, "Yes, I fell while playing with my dolls. Can you come upstairs and help me?" I unlocked my door and headed towards the stairs where it finally hit me. I was alone in the cabin, so whatever the hell was upstairs could not be my little sister. I sprinted out of the cabin wearing only a t-shirt and my dad's slippers, and it was freezing cold outside. I stopped running about 150 meters away from my cabin and looked at it from a distance. In one of the windows on the second floor, I could see a shadow just standing still, and I got the feeling it was staring at me, even though I couldn't make out any eyes. I stood there outside of my family's cabin in the freezing cold, maybe about 30 minutes, and cried until my family finally arrived. My mum and dad asked me what was wrong, but I didn't want them to think I was crazy, so I just made up a story. I don't remember what I told them, but they seemed concerned about me. One thing I remember is that I talked my mum and dad into driving me to my grandparents' cabin because I refused to go back into the cabin. Ever since that day, I refuse to join my family when they go to our family cabin. It's really hard to explain, but the feeling I got that day in the cabin can only be described as not wanted, like someone or something wanted to harm me, and I have nightmares about the shadow figure thing even today. It's haunting my dreams. My family, me, my husband, and my daughter who just turned a year old, went to a spa hotel called the Elms in Excelsior Springs right after Christmas 2018 that was supposedly haunted. They even offer ghost tours and ghost packages. I think that sort of thing is fun, but it seemed like a way for the hotel to make extra money, and I didn't think that it was really haunted. I went to a high school in Colorado, and we visited the Stanley Hotel, etc., and I don't mind spooky stuff at all. Anyway, this hotel is located in a town with hot springs that was built upon because the water supposedly had healing and medicinal properties. There's not a ton to do there, and the town itself was kind of sad and worn down. We went through the town museum that showed the history of the town and bathhouses and got lunch. When we got back to our hotel, we were down the hall and could hear a radio blasting. It was distorted, but it was so loud, and as we got closer, it was not just on one channel, it was scanning through different stations. As we stood outside our door to unlock it, we realized the blasting radio was coming from our room. The maid had come in before we left for lunch, so no one should have been in there. As a side note, my dad works for hotels, and there are a couple of things I always do because I'm so used to staying in them. One of which being to turn off the alarm when you arrive, in case the previous occupant set it. We wanted to sleep in, and that was one of our main goals for the trip. My daughter, who used to be a great sleeper, did a good job of sleeping the first night. The second night, she was screaming like something was really wrong. She pulled herself up in her pack and play, and was jumping up and down and red-faced, like she was desperate to get out. I could not get her to calm down. I know she was a baby, and it was a new place, but this was unusual. I held her and took her to bed with us, but she, clung to me all night. Last thing, my husband got me a massage as a Christmas gift, so I went down to the grotto area while he took my daughter to the swimming pool. In the waiting area, they were very serious about no talking, no noise, no phones, etc. It's a nice spa, and the massage was expensive, not a kind of place where they would pull stunts. The therapist took me to my room when it was my turn. She set up a few things and turned on the relaxing music, think ocean waves, etc. Told me to get undressed and lay on my stomach, and she'd be right back. I got undressed and got under the sheets and was waiting for her to come back. All of a sudden, the music turned to FM radio and got really loud and was searching through a bunch of channels. The therapist knocked and came in. She walked right over to the radio and said, like it happened all the time, the ghosts have been messing with this all day, and then got back to work, business as usual. I wish I took a ghost tour so I knew more. I thought it was hokey and a marketing ploy, but this hotel was definitely haunted. I kind of want to go back to see if it was a one-time thing, but part of me is genuinely freaked out and wants to stay away. When I was 8 or 9, I saw something weird on Christmas Eve. This was many, many years ago, but I still remember it like it was yesterday. I still believed in Santa Claus then, as a good amount of children do, and I had the usual anxiety and excitement for Santa to leave Christmas presents by the tree. After I went to bed, I had some trouble going to sleep with holiday nerves and such. I had finally drifted off when I woke up to the sound of soft footsteps somewhere in my room. I automatically assumed it was Santa Claus, and I was scared to see him for fear he might leave, or his magic will fail. I opened my eye just barely and saw this black figure standing over my bed, staring at me. It was tall, probably around 6 feet tall, and it was completely dark. It looked almost blacker than black in a way. I couldn't see any eyes, a mouth, a nose on it, but I could clearly see the outline of a head, arms, body, and legs. It looked like a bigger person, so thinking it was Santa just made sense. It stayed in one spot for 10, maybe 15 seconds, until it took a few steps closer. It leaned in a little more, still a few feet away from me, and then stayed there for 10 or 15 seconds more. Even though I couldn't see a face, I knew it was looking right at me. It's just that weird feeling you get when you know you're being watched or looked at. I closed my eyes again and waited for a few minutes. When I looked back, it was gone. I lived in a pretty old house at the time, so the doors and floorboards were squeaky and loud. I heard the footsteps, but I never heard the door open. I never saw this figure again, though I've had some other spooky experiences in this house. I asked my mum if she heard Santa when she came into my room last night, and she looked confused for a second. Then she played along and just assumed I was lying. I know this wasn't a person, and I know this wasn't a dream. I also know the spirits or entities are often attracted to a lot of excitement and energy, so Christmas would be a perfect time for a ghost to pass through. It was already dark in the late afternoon when my brother and I arrived in the small town of Grand Rapids, Minnesota. It was December and bitterly cold. The reason for the visit was to spend Christmas with our grandma. She was well into her 90s, so it was reasonable to assume each holiday would be the last. As it happened, this one was. I'm the youngest of 4 brothers. At the time, I was living in Minneapolis. My parents also lived there, but they were splitting their time between Minnesota and Arizona. Currently, they were in Phoenix and hadn't planned to return to Minnesota for the holidays. Knowing our grandmother would be alone, I had called my brother in Chicago and suggested he grab me so we could head up north together, where our grandma had been staying at an assisted living center. The trip was uneventful, and we had a pleasant Christmas Eve, doing puzzles and chatting with our grandma. As the night came to a close, we headed to our lodgings. My brother had made the accommodations beforehand. We'd be staying at the Rainbow Inn. The motel itself was unremarkable. It was old, and it didn't appear foreboding from outside. Our room was clean and furnished with what you would expect: beds, a desk, some chairs, a television on a cabinet, and a small bathroom. I'd call it your standard cookie-cutter roadside motel. The room was fairly small. 2 beds lay side by side, with the door at roughly a foot of one of the beds. This was the bed my brother selected, so mine was a little bit further away from the door, but only perhaps by 7 to 8 feet. The hotel was mostly empty, probably due to the holiday and it being the dead of winter. After checking in, we headed down to the bar, which only had a couple of other people in it. At the time, I was partial to White Russians, and I had one that evening as a nightcap. We finished our drinks and headed back to the room. We knew we had a long drive the next day. I was tired, got undressed and flopped onto my bed. My brother decided to watch TV. I wasn't interested, so I rolled over and closed my eyes. I don't remember when it started, but I want to say it was only a few moments after I had laid down. It was only this: the door handle suddenly began to shake, quite aggressively. I recall thinking this was strange, because it didn't sound like someone had mistaken this room for theirs and simply tried to open the door. The handle was being deliberately, violently shaken. I sat up and looked at the door, and then my brother. After a couple of seconds, it stopped. We looked at each other, gave a collective shrug, and lay back down. Soon, the noise started up again. Now, I could understand someone, after a few glasses of eggnog, getting their room number wrong and trying the door to enter. But this was different. It was forceful. It was clear to me the intention was not to open the door, but instead to let the person inside know someone was out there. I thought perhaps it was kids playing a prank. I hadn't seen anyone in the motel, and it was well past 11 p.m., so it seemed odd that any children would be allowed to roam the halls. I got up and walked over to the door. We had heard no voices, no giggles, no closing doors or retaliating footsteps. I looked out the door's peephole, which gave a decent view of the hallway, but saw no one. I opened the door and leaned out. Our room was near the center of the hall, and I could see the exits on both ends. I recall there was a hallway that split off perhaps 20 feet down my left. I assumed this was where the pranksters retreated to, as there wouldn't be enough time for them to run down the entire hallway and out of one of the exits, or enter another room without us hearing a door to another room close. I looked for some other explanation. Was the door itself somehow causing the sound? Was it loose and perhaps the wind or pressure of the structure was making it shake? I closed the door and pushed it. It was very solid. I couldn't replicate the sounds, except by grabbing the handle and vigorously shaking it. This was getting annoying. I was tired and just wanted to sleep. I climbed back into bed, but I lay there like a coiled spring, waiting for whoever was pranking us to return. I'd enjoy catching them in the act if they did. Sure enough, moments later, the shaking started up again. I sprung up and was at the door in an instant and looked out of the peephole again, certain to see some kids running down the hallway. But I saw no one. From the time the noise stopped to the time I was at the door was a couple of seconds at most. The only way I couldn't have seen or heard someone was if they were smart enough to crouch down, knowing I couldn't see anything directly under the peephole. I opened the door. No one was there. No one had been there. My brother and I are both skeptics. We were certain there was a reasonable explanation for this, but truth be told, I was beginning to get a little spooked. I had never experienced anything like this. It seemed to defy logic. Once again, I crawled into bed, but I was so unnerved, sleep seemed out of the question. I was upset I hadn't caught the pranksters, but was also dimly aware that there were none to be caught. Something was making this happen. Something unseen. Someone with a purpose. It scared me. I recall making a conscious decision to will the noise to stop. I closed my eyes tightly and focused on the thought. I didn't want this to happen anymore. Enough. You've made your point. Whatever it might have been, stop. Now. And it did. The door rattle didn't return. After a while, I relaxed a little. My brother shut off the TV and turned out the lights. The silence of the room was complete. However, as the night wore on, I found myself woken up by other noises. I could hear the door chain moving. I could hear other unidentifiable sounds at the door. I didn't hear the door handle noise again, but all through the night, I was subjected to the repeated sounds of the door being fiddled with in some manner. A pattern emerged. I'd hear a sound, became terrified. It would stop, and I would drift off to sleep again. In the morning, my brother and I discussed what might have happened. All he would say was that we had visitors, and in the bright light of the day, it all seemed a bit silly. What it might have been seemed not very important. I just wanted to go home. We checked out of the hotel and got on the road. Several hours later, we approached Minneapolis, the skyline looming in the distance. Not long after that, my brother dropped me at my apartment, and he carried on to Chicago. As I shifted back into my life, I placed the incident behind me. Aside from telling a few close friends, I simply moved on. A few months passed, and I went to visit my oldest brother who was living in Arizona. Years before, he'd lived in Grand Rapids and knew the Rainbow Inn, although he'd never stayed there. I told him the story. All the while, he smiled at me as I related the story. It was a knowing smile that I at first mistook for disbelief. When I was done, he told me our brother, the one who had been in the motel with me, had recently visited and related the same story to him. I did not know this. He said our stories were essentially identical. I'd not spoken to him since he'd dropped me off at my apartment. The next thing he said chilled me. As I've mentioned, he'd lived in Grand Rapids years before and naturally was very familiar with the town. He told me about the Rainbow Inn. The place I found so plain and average had a story of hauntings. I assumed he had gotten this information from the locals he encountered while living there years ago. While my oldest brother likes to joke and tease, he is for the most part a stoic Midwesterner, not given to nonsense or deception. I believed him. Now, obviously, if I had been aware of this beforehand, and the events of that night had played out as they had, I'd no doubt believe it was our imaginations that were to blame. But the fact that this motel was so unassuming, the location so mundane, and the building so very unremarkable, leads me to believe that whatever happened that night was not something that had simply sprung from our imaginations. I'm still a skeptic. I like to think this could be explained without resorting to the supernatural. What I do know is this: it was real, it was terrifying, and I will never forget this experience. This happened back in 2016 on Christmas Eve night. We had just gotten back from my sister's, and we were sitting in the car for a few minutes. It was fairly cold, keep this in mind. Also, side note, we had a bunch of cats, so at first, we hadn't thought anything of it. We sat there for about 10 minutes, and we heard rustling. Not thinking anything about it because of the cats, we blew it off. Not even a minute later, we hear it again. My mum just so happened to look up, and there was a bald man in a wife-beater tank top and shorts. My mum and I both had that uneasy feeling because of his choice of clothing. It was 32 degrees, and he's in summertime clothes. Weird. My mum has her window cracked, and he was barely a foot away from our car. Mum yelled out to him and said to back away from our car, which, surprise, he didn't. He continued to stand there and stare at us. My mum decided to try and scare him. She yelled out to him and said she had a handgun and would blow him away. She didn't have her handgun on her, but she definitely made sure he thought she did. He threw his hands up, but continued to get closer to our car. So my mum threw her phone at me, and I was told to dial 911. I told the dispatcher what was going on, and she said she'd have the police there right away. My mother proceeded to try and run him down, but he went between the two porches, and our car wouldn't fit because of how close the porches were to each other. Finally, about half an hour later, the cops finally show up and took our statements. The station was literally down the road from us, and if he had actually tried something, I felt as if it would have been too late. If he hadn't ran, I wouldn't have thought he had ill intentions, but he ran, so I was very pissed off it took so long for the cops to show up. The cops stayed and looked everywhere for him, but came up empty. Neither my mum nor I slept that night, or finished opening presents because of fear that he would come back. The police thought maybe he wanted to steal the gifts that were in the car, but we may never know. The scariest part is, months later, it came to light that he had escaped jail. He was put in for assault, so who knows what he would have done to me and my mum. So to the escaped convict, who scared the hell out of my mum and me, let's not ever meet again.